So basically, when it comes to making sure that the 808 and the kick don't clash with each other, there's a couple different techniques that you can utilize. You can accomplish this by What up? It's your boy, Luke for Prez, back again with another video for you guys. Hope everyone's doing great. Today, I'm going to be covering exactly how I mix my beats. I just finished a new beat, so I'm basically just gonna walk through my exact process. I am by no means an expert. I am not an audio engineer. I am entirely self-taught, and I really just kind of go by what sounds good to my ear, and that's something that you develop over time as you make more and more beats. So I don't necessarily adhere to all of the best practices of mixing that you would read in a textbook, but who needs textbooks anyway? You know what I'm saying? In any case, if you're new to the channel and you're interested in music producer related content, hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm, hit that subscribe button, put the bell on so you don't miss the new drops. And with all that being said, let's get into this video. So I'm gonna just start by playing the beat for you guys just so you can hear it in its rawest form, entirely unmixed. Here we go. So yeah, that's what we got. As you can hear, it sounds like a mess. The 808 is super distorted. The kick and the 808 are clashing a little bit. Everything's right down the middle. You know, it sounds very flat. So I'm gonna address those things now. And basically what I'm gonna do is just go down the list one by one and show you exactly what I'm using here and what I do to mix each individual component of the beat. And in some cases, I don't do anything. I just leave it as is. And we'll get into that. So first up, as you can see, for this particular beat, I used a loop from Looperman, Don't Judge Me, that I have adjusted, pitched down about 7 semitones for the sake of the key that I was trying to make the beat in. And basically, the first thing that I do with all melodies, regardless of whether I created it on my own or I'm using a sample or whatever the case may be, I throw on an EQ and I remove some of the low end. Now, there is no exact science to the amount of low end you have to remove. Again, this goes back to, you know, what sounds good to your ear. And it's going to depend on what 808 you use, because the whole point of cutting out all of that low end is so it gives more room for your 808 to really kind of punch through the mix. So based on how this was sounding, this was actually the original layer that I created, or the original octave that it was in. Just based on my ear, I cut about up to 131 hertz in this case. I think that's the terminology. See, I don't even know the damn terminology, to be real. And that, to my ear, gave the 808 enough room to do its thing. And then as you can see, I also boosted some of the mids here, some of the high frequencies to a degree. Best practice would say that you should also cut out some of the highs. I don't always do that with the melodies. Again, it just kind of depends on what other like percussion elements that I have that might be taking up some of the high-end frequencies, and really just like how it sounds to my ear. So in this case, I boosted some of the mids and didn't cut out any of the highs for the main melody layer. This next layer here is just basically like a secondary layer that I want to kind of sit in the background a little bit. It's the same loop, just up a much higher octave. And I also cut out way more of the lows and most of the highs too, just to make it sound like a different instrument is playing, essentially. So the first thing I'm gonna do here is actually turn this down a bit, because again, I don't want it to be super prominent in the mix here. I really want this melody layer to be the more dominant force, right? And it's okay to like listen to these things on solo, right? But really what you want to do for the most part is make sure the entire beat is playing while you're mixing, because it might sound one way when the things you're honing in on are soloed, but you want to hear how it sounds in the entire mix. So I mainly do it like this, like where everything's playing at once, and then I'll bring this down according to this, how it sounds with everything. So about there sounds good to me, so I'm gonna leave that as it is. In terms of panning, I typically leave all of the melody elements right down the middle. I don't pan it one way or the other. And same for the kick drum and the 808. And then pretty much everything else I pan to varying degrees, which we'll get into shortly. The last melody layer that I have here is actually a vocal sound from Arcade. That's what it sounds like by itself. I've already applied a couple little things to this as I was making the beat. EQ'd a lot of the lows out, boosted some of the mid to high frequencies, and then the very high frequencies I removed entirely. This is what it sounded like before I did that. So you can hear like there's a lot more low end. And again, I didn't want it to clash. And again, this is just like a supplementary thing. So that's how it sounds without the EQ, and here's what it sounds like with, again. Additionally, I added some Space Designer, which is a stock Logic plugin for reverb, and I took down the dry a little bit, just minus 2.6 dB, and the wet, I took it to 16. If I turn that off, you'll hear it just sounds a little more dry and not as spacey. And then with. Very, very subtle difference. Like you might not even be able to tell. In terms of the levels, let's hear where I want it. So again, I just kind of want it in the background, so I'm going to turn it down a bit. I think that's cool. It's just coming in on the second half of the chorus. And to show you just what the preset is, in Arcade, it is from the Distant Voices pack, and it's called Sigaku. Sounds like a Dragon Ball Z character. Moving on to the clap here. That's what it sounds like. It is a Ronnie J clap from Splice. And as you can see, like sometimes it just depends on the clap sound. Sometimes I will apply an EQ to boost the highs of a clap, depending on, you know, just again, my personal preference. In this case, I actually removed that because I liked how it sounded better without it. I'll show you with and without. So that's with and without. In terms of the volume or panning, like I keep it straight down the middle and I keep the claps pretty loud. Again, this is kind of personal preference and I'll adjust it as needed. But in this case, I like how it sounds without having to change the volume, I think. So yeah, I'm totally fine with that. I'm gonna leave it as is. And you're gonna notice, like, as we go down the rest of these instruments here, like a lot of the times, especially with percussion sounds, I barely touch them in terms of adding plugins to them. And really what that comes down to is strong sound selection. If you're using top-notch, high-quality, professional drum sounds, a lot of the times the producers who put those packs together have already mixed and mastered those sounds. So you don't really need to do too much beyond that. If you're finding that you're having to add a bunch of different plugins to your snare, for instance, you might want to rethink the sounds that you're choosing in the first place. So that's something to think about. It definitely cuts down on the workload when it comes to mixing if you already have some really high quality sounds. My go-tos are Splice, and then, just kind of random drum kits that I find online or from some of my favorite producers. In terms of looking for the best drum kits, I recommend seeking out producers that you admire that are actually getting placements and see if they have drum kits available for sale so you can use the exact sounds that these top-notch producers are using. That's a really big benefit of Splice. There's a ton, like Southside has a drum kit on there, Murda Beats has 2 drum kits on there. There's a ton of like A-list producers that are just giving out the sauce, and it's like $8 a month for Splice. So definitely something to think about. Moving on to the hi-hats. In terms of the sound I used, this is just a random hi-hat that I got in a drum kit like years ago, but I thought it sounded good with the melody. Just real basic pattern here. And all I've done is EQ'd out all of the lows and boosted the highs just a bit. This is what it sounds like without the EQ and with. Again, very subtle difference, and that's really what a lot of this boils down to, real subtle differences. I also added a tiny bit of reverb to this, brought the wet down to negative 28 dBs, just to give it a little bit more space so it's not so dry. This is what it sounds like without and with. Now let's see where we want to have this placed in the mix. So I kind of have a weird process when it comes to leveling. I know a lot of people start at 0 and then slowly bring in the sounds from there and find a level. I do the reverse, right? I have everything the same volume, and then I slowly bring things down. And then once I have everything kind of where I want it, I bring everything even further down to make sure nothing's clipping, which I'll get into. So again, this is just my process. There's no right or wrong way to do it. This is just the workflow that I've found that works for me. Typically at this stage, my hi-hats sit somewhere between -2 and -3 dBs. In this case, -3.5 sounded good. I also very, very slightly pan the hi-hats typically either to the left or the right, depending on how I'm feeling in that moment. Right now, I'm feeling right a little bit. And that sounds good to me. So moving on to one of the secondary snares that I've used. Let's see what this one is. Okay, so just a really basic snare. I got this from a Nick Mira drum kit. And usually what I do here is have this lower than the clap by a pretty significant margin. And I typically moderately pan it one way or the other. Let's see what sounds good here. Really the goal here is just to add a little bit of bounce, but not stand out and draw too much attention in the mix. I like how that sounds, very subtle. Moving on to the next percussion sound I have. Just a different snare or rim. I think it's a rim, yeah. Just real basic rim. I'm not even sure which drum kit I got this one from. I've had it for a while. Let's see where we want this one to sit. And usually, like, if I have multiple snare sounds like this or percussion sounds, I'll pan them in different directions just to kind of have them play off of each other and just bounce around in your headphones. So that sounds good to me. Moving on. So this beat, I kind of went crazy with these like perk sounds, trying to get a good bounce going. So we have yet another one here. Real basic sound you've probably heard a million times. I got this one from a Cody drum kit. He has some of the best drum sounds in my opinion. I've bought a few of his kits before and I use them all the time. So kind of like the idea of keeping this one down the middle because it almost acts as like a kick. I like how that sounds. I'm just gonna leave that as is down the middle. And next up here we have an open hat. This is what it sounds like. Real basic one. This is a Southside hi-hat. I think I got it from his Splice kit. I usually bury the open hats like deep in the mix so they're really not prominent. I know some producers have them like very loud, but I pan them like significantly and I keep them like way in the back most of the time. That sounds perfect to me. And as you can see with all of those percussion sounds, I added 0 plugins. It was all just about panning and finding the right volume. Next up, we have this shaker that's just for added bounce. I got this shaker from a free drill drum kit that I found somewhere. This is what it sounds like. Pretty nice sound. Already has some reverb built in. So again, there's no real need to add anything to it. Shakers are probably the quietest sound in my mixes if I use them. It's just to kind of get an extra rhythm that kind of plays off the hi-hats a bit. So let's see where I want these to go. I want these to be like barely noticeable, if at all. That sounds good. So moving on here, this is actually a sub bass that I have for the bridge. It is the Growler Moog bass preset from Omnisphere, and this is what it sounds like. And I just have it playing with 2 melody elements. That's what it sounds like. And what I decided to do here is actually add an EQ to boost some of the lows and take out a lot of the highs. So that's what it sounds like with and without. Just makes it a little brighter, again, very minor. I also added sausage fattener to this one. As you can see, turned the fatness up to 4 and the color up to 4. I don't go crazy with the sausage fattener. It's just, again, to make the sounds kind of be brighter and have more texture, if that makes sense. So I added that, and this is what it sounds like. So to me, that makes a pretty significant difference, even though I barely turned it on. Next up, we have the 808 that I used, which is the Dior 808 from the first Murder Beats drum kit on Splice, I believe. He has some phenomenal 808s on there, and they come with like a ton of distortion, but just like the perfect amount to where it's not overdone, and like you don't really need to do anything to these 808s. They come like out of the box, beautiful, ready to use. This is what it sounds like. And all I did was add a very, very slight EQ, just taking out the frequencies below 30 hertz, because those are basically, you can't even like perceive them, they're so low, and it just kind of helps the 808 pop a little bit. That's all I do to the 808s. And then finally we have the kick, which I got from a Daniel Taylor drum kit, and this is what it sounds like. As you can see, I have done absolutely nothing to the kick. So basically, when it comes to making sure that the 808 and the kick don't clash with each other, there's a couple different techniques that you can utilize. You can accomplish this by EQing out some of the low-end frequencies from the 808 and then boosting those same frequencies in the kick using an EQ. You can also pull up a compressor and sidechain the kick to the 808. So every time the kick hits, the 808 ducks just for like a split second, which gives the kick more room to punch through the mix. I'm gonna show you guys a major shortcut where you don't have to do any of that shit. If I find that the 808 and the kick happen to be clashing, which in this case, I believe they do. This is what it sounds like right now. It's not too bad, but like, I don't know. It just doesn't like hit how I want it to sound, right? Also, like the 808 is super distorted as it is at this volume, but we're gonna adjust that in a minute. But anyways, here is the cheat code for making sure your 808s and your kicks do not clash. Highlight all of your 808s and move them ever so slightly off the grid. Just like that. Off the grid. You feel me? And now let's hear how it sounds. So to me, it again, very minor difference, but it's like the kick punches through the mix so much better. Check it out. If I'm having issues with the clashing of the 808 and the kick, that's pretty much all I do. So that is basically the entire beat in terms of the mixing process. The final thing that I do is turn down the volume on everything at this point, now that I have everything kind of leveled where I like it, to make sure that nothing is clipping. As you can see, we're like super clipping right now. It's 11 dBs in the red. So the amount of headroom that I like to leave in my beats is a little bit less than what they say best practice is. They say you want to have about 6 dBs of headroom, so when you go to master the track, you can make it, extra loud. But I ultimately keep everything around about -2 dBs, and then I still put like a soft clipper or something when I go to master it, so it's even louder, right? So that's kind of how I do it. I just make sure that I'm somewhere around -2 dBs when I'm done with this, and since it's showing that it's 11 in the red, let's put this down to about 13. So like I usually start with a melody because I didn't really adjust the volume of the main melody here. It's at 0 dBs. So I'm just gonna highlight everything and bring everything down to about -13. And now from there, I just let the beat play and see what the number shows. So far, so good. We're at -4.5. Now the kick is coming in. That's going to bring things up significantly. And we're right at -2 there. And that is the loudest part of the beat. Obviously, it is the hook. So if you get to beyond the hook, assuming you've arranged it to where the hook is at the very start of the beat, you should be good to go for the rest of the track. So I'm not gonna play the entire thing here, but best practice, obviously, you should let the beat run to the very end and just make sure that you're not clipping. You're at least -2 dBs. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the mixing lesson of the day. I wouldn't even call it a lesson, to be honest. This is just how I do it. You might have a way better way. Leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe, turn the bell on, follow me on Instagram at Luke4Prez, on TikTok if you want, also at Luke4Prez. You don't have to. And that is all I got. I'm gonna let the final beat play, and that's it. Peace.